So the purpose of this lab was to find out which sweetener would cause the yeast to produce the most carbon dioxide through fermentation, and our hypothesis was that the sweetener that contained the most glucose will make the bread rise the quickest. And our results were that Splenda caused the yeast to produce the most carbon dioxide, and we found out that Splenda is made up of dextrose, which is a mirror image of glucose, and sucralose, which is sucrose with chlorine substituting some hydroxyl groups. But hydroxyl groups have no effect on the production of CO2 because they are just groups of hydrogen. And dextrose is also a monosaccharide, which can be broken down easily by the yeast. And we got sweet and low as the second fastest production of CO2 because even though it contains dextrose, it has a maltodextrin shell, which is not able to be metabolized by yeast. And equal is the third most productive, also had dextrose, but again had a maltodextrin shell, which the yeast cannot metabolize. It also contains aspartame, which is a protein and therefore is not useful to the yeast. And after equal, the control bag was inflated the most. Well, this doesn't make any sense at first, but we know that the yeast cells also contain glucose stores at the beginning that they could have used to metabolize when water is added, which could explain the CO2 production. And Truvia had almost no inflation of the bag because the main ingredient is erythritol, which is produced by fermenting glucose. Because of this, the yeast would not be able to gain anything in fermenting the pre-fermented glucose. And the domino sugar surprisingly did not produce as much CO2 because even though it has the most direct form of glucose, sucrose is a disaccharide and it would take much longer to metabolize because the yeast would have to break down the bonds connecting the fructose and glucose before metabolizing. And finally, the raw sugar had similar issues as the refined sugar, and also had a coating of wax that made the glucose more difficult to access. So in conclusion, it was found that the Splenda yielded the fastest CO2 production because of the accessible dextrose, as well as the sucralose, still containing glucose and fructose. However, if given more time, the refined sugar would have yielded more CO2 because yeast prefers glucose to dextrose and would produce more CO2 after it took the time to break the bonds in the sucrose.